Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Top of Mind podcast. With us today, a very special guest, Dr. Slowinski. Could you please introduce him?
Yeah, it's my honor to introduce a good friend of mine, Richard Hinman. I always call him Rich. Has a very rich background in government service, including the military and the State Department, where he and I worked very closely together. I wanted to bring Rich on as not only a veteran, and thank you, Rich, for your service. And Victor is also in the service, and we thank Victor for his military service every month that he goes to drill. So we thank you both. And some of Rich's military experience even involves operations in Panama, combat operations in Panama, Desert Storm, Peru, El Salvador, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Together with me at one embassy, he had another 5 embassies that he worked in the Department of State, and he was also a federal agent in New York and New Jersey between his military and diplomatic careers. So another underachiever that we have here. Rich also is a West Point graduate, and he has a master's from Princeton, and just a wonderful person to talk about things that are top of mind. So with that, Rich, welcome to the program. I wanted to start with you. We've just passed President Trump's 100 days in his second term, where he pulled the Grover-Cleveland Redux, which hadn't happened since the 1890s. I think it was 1892. And so just an amazing comeback story for President Trump, but not a smooth ride in the 100 days. He's done some things that have disrupted folks. For our purposes tonight, I kind of wanted to focus on the things you have experience in and get your take on the direction of the country, what we could do it, and often how you observe how the first 100 days are going on these topics. And so those are what's going on at the Department of Defense and what's going on at our beloved State Department. So with that, Rich, I'll turn it over to you for a few initial thoughts, and then I'll just bombard you with questions as they come up.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you, Patrick. First of all, thank you for having me on the program. I really appreciate it. It is truly an honor to be joining you, and wow, we've come a long way since our embassy service together. So I think for the first 100 days, look, President Trump ran as a disruptor. He ran, he promised that we would see significant changes to the status quo. A status quo that, frankly, many Americans felt was not working for them and was not working for the country. He has delivered on that. I think there's whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, everyone will agree that this has been an interesting and eventful 100 days in office. Look, I think the president moved fast. What I'm seeing out of this is very much a Silicon Valley startup mindset that you may expect to see from an entrepreneurial figure and a businessman, which is move fast and break things. Certainly with Doge. So look,
let me interrupt you right then,
sure.
Because I think one of the things I'm hearing from some of our listeners is, and even my Uber drivers, they're kind of pissed off at Doge, right? They're not fans. And I think that they are fans of saving the government money. It's the delivery. It's how it's been done is just not settling right with them. And these are all people in the DC area. I think if you ask people outside the area, they're like, it's about damn time.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. I think it is I think there is a messaging issue. There is a question of not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it. I think everybody in Washington was unprepared for not just kind of the onslaught of activity, but some of the real kind of vitriol that came with it. An awful lot of heated rhetoric that I think does not necessarily will not necessarily stand up that well in the light of day going forward. But I think I think there is a difference inside the Beltway and outside the Beltway, as you said. Outside the Beltway, this is not unpopular, and I think for us as federal employees or former federal employees, it's also a question. You know, there should be some moments of introspection for us in terms of how we read the room within the United States and understanding sort of how aspects of this social contract are being interpreted outside of Washington.
I think you're right. We look at the current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. And Secretary Hegseth has had some bumpy rides. We've had the Signal Gate. We've had
Right.
Advisors getting fired that have turned around and spilled the tea on other podcasts. Not a great look. But what are the overall things that the Department of Defense is focusing in on? I think most Americans, if they were allowed to answer those questions, and not just questions about the current secretary's love life, I think you would, and if they actually read what he's trying to accomplish in terms of the warrior, reviving the warrior ethos. I wanted to, as someone who did not serve in the military, but who has served around my military colleagues and friends in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, I wanted to turn to you, Rich, tonight while we have you here with your military experience. And I wanted to get your take on reviving the warrior ethos. What is that? What does that mean? I mean, people in academia and ivory towers know what an ethos is, but what do you think it means to the average person who's paying taxes that wants a strong military that can actually pass PT and that can actually protect our country? How does that relate to this phrase that Secretary Hegseth uses all the time, I think fairly effectively, is reviving the warrior ethos? And then why did it need to be revived in the first place?
Well, I think when you talk about the warrior ethos, you're talking about a lot of different things, and frankly, it is also one of those expressions that means different things to different people. When I think of a warrior ethos, I'm thinking of a force that is trained, disciplined, motivated, lethal, and willing and able to perform its wartime functions. And that these wartime functions are your priority in peacetime. The reality is when you're commanding a unit, lots of other things can crowd in on this, on the primacy of this wartime training mission. But I think when we're talking about reviving the warrior ethos, we're talking about simply putting these wartime functions and the requirements for it: physical fitness, marksmanship, the ability, within an Army and Marine context, we're talking about the ability to shoot, move, and communicate, and to put these front and center within our day-to-day activities. And how we prepare and organize our units. So have we gotten away from it? Boy, that's a tough question. I think 20 years of service, 20 years of deployments and 20 years of wartime service certainly had an impact on that. On one hand, it sharpened it. On one hand, it got everyone. It got everyone prepared, certainly for a certain type of conflict. As we pivot into a different geopolitical era of great power competition, those demands are going to be different. At the same time, what I think we have seen a series of distractions come in that really take away from that wartime, that focus on our wartime mission, that focus on combat readiness. It is axiomatic within the military that whenever anything goes wrong, one of the institutional responses is to force some sort of training session, some sort of mandatory class, some sort of mandatory stand down, where we take it to address that particular case, whether it's sexual harassment, so on and so forth. These are issues that are frankly worth addressing. But the mandatory class takes on the character of a check the block type of exercise. And I believe it was in 2009, I want to say, the Army War College did a study where they took a look at the aggregate impact of these different mandatory classes and these different training distractors. And it was truly stark what they were finding. What they were finding was that these frankly non-combat related requirements ate up a huge amount of the training year. By some count, it was actually more. There was actually more time. If you did this the way you were supposed to, you would spend more time in the mandatory training than you would. There would be no time left for actual combat training.
I think those are all valid points. I mean, the readiness factor, another thing that Secretary Heggs has been talking about is readiness and what that means. Let's be honest. I mean, with technology, we actually have kind of gotten to the point where we have let things go. We've let ourselves go in terms of motivation, in terms of physicality, in terms of health. And I think that these themes of reviving the warrior ethos, if I were a branding guy for the Department of Defense, if Secretary Heggs have called me up and said, "Hey, Dr. Slowinski, can you come and design?" I would make the sexiest damn videos about how great it is to be a cyber warrior. And if you were the guy sitting down in grandma's basement, with your 2 or 3 screens all day playing games or what have you, and you wanted to actually do something for your country, I would make it the most interesting, coolest job. Because my fear is, from just my experience of being around the issues, being in frenetic areas as a civilian, but still being there, is that the way that we combat with our enemies now, it's very digital. And I'm wondering if you share that concern that, yes, you need to have your standard military ready to go, air, land, and sea. I get that. I think nobody would disagree with that. But do you think we're actually prepared for the cyber war that happens every day?
No, but I think we're actually making some significant strides towards preparedness in the cyber arena. First of all, I think, Patrick, you raise just a terrific point, that one that I think we need to sort of to keep in the forefront of our minds. It's that look, combat is evolving, and combat is evolving maybe faster now than it has at any point. Certainly in my service, but I'm also a big historian. I read quite a bit and study the human condition and study the human condition under the stress of combat.
Hey, we're gonna get with your stress of combat. We're gonna get a newbie to that whole arena, producer Victor, in a second, to weigh in on what he thinks in terms of what he's learning as being in the military and his training, what he can share with us, and how he thinks it's going. But Rich, I agree with you. I think we really have maybe I'm wrong. I haven't served, but I have a sense that exactly what you said. Combat is changing the definition of how we're going to fight our enemies. President Trump's doing a little bit of it economically, right? There's economic warfare. There is cyber warfare. There's strategic warfare. There's policy. There's development warfare. I mean, it's all out there, right? And
I'm going to make another issue. You're exactly right. I fully agree, and I also think that one of the issues that we there's a cultural context to warfare, and certainly within the American tradition and within the Western tradition, we tend to view war and peace as binary conditions. You're either at war or you're at peace. I can tell you that I think other traditions don't necessarily see it that way. Certainly, Russian strategic thought shows a broad gray area, a broad space in between peacetime competition and peacetime coexistence, and full up kinetic activity. There's a but I think our other adversaries have that sense as well. I think the Iranians are masters of it, operating in that space in between formal conflict and normal diplomatic and commercial interaction. And this is where cyber and some of these emerging technologies really come in. When we're talking cyber, we're talking space, we're talking different domains. We have much less established rules of engagement.
Right. I mean, look at the resource war that's been going on since we've existed as human beings that communicate with each other and actually rationally try to think, and where diplomacy comes from. Look where we are now in terms of the world and all the resources that are valuable, from water to food to energy under the ground to man-made islands in the China Sea, to parts of the Arctic, to where Greenland is. There's a reason that countries are concerned about how things get divided up and what kind of partners can be there. And I just hope, is my prayer, that even though it's been a crazy 100 days, that I hope that more conservatives step up and answer the call. And what 2016 was devastating for people who were part of the Trump administration, then tried to find a job after they left.
Yeah.
And, that didn't really happen it's never happened to any Democrats that I know of. But it definitely, I maybe it's happening now. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. But for people to not have these kind of, for lack of better expression, the Trump cooties, right? That now you're tarnished with you were a Trumper, and now your whole career after your service to your country, not to President Trump, but to your country, has gone in the toilet. I think that's changing. But when I want to go back to what we started in the beginning of the program, is that President Trump, regardless of the trolling, he doesn't have a third term. People, just stop. It's right. President Trump is a master at putting something out there, getting a big reaction, and then double dipping and double down. He gets another scoop by all the crazy reaction, and he just gets another scoop of that, and it kind of just feeds his energy. So and he thrives off of that. And if he trolls and then he gets a reaction, he's going to troll again. I think there were two memes of him being dressed as the next pope. And, he put the first one out there, he just forwards it. It's not that he created it or his team created it. He forwarded it and as a truth. And then, he got a really bad reaction, and then he double downed on it and sent another one out. But he's really good at just kind of getting in people's heads. And that's another thing that my Uber drivers don't like. They love President Trump. They don't love the delivery. But I always ask him, what policies do you like? And most of my Uber drivers, no matter where they're from or where they are on the political spectrum, they don't like illegal immigration. They want us to reimagine tariffs in a good way eventually, without too many people suffering from that, losing their jobs and not being able to buy the things they're used to buying. Those are fair points, but they do think it should be equalized. They want, any kind of social things to be handled by parents and communities, not schools and things that you pay taxes for that are municipal or federal, telling parents and people how to behave a certain way. They don't like that. There's a lot of good that's coming with this 100 days, but I think what everyone is telling me, there's one common denominator, Rich, and that is it's too fast. But the man doesn't have much time this second term. I mean, when you really think about how much time he has once we get to midterms, it's not much. It's not 4 total years. just to wind things down. I mean, you and I know this because we've been with several administrations. You never get the full 4 years. So this also explains this kind of hypersonic speed that President Trump is taking on these issues. Are they all going to come out the way he wants? Probably not. But he's trying to keep his promises. And I mean, that's how I view it. Do you have a different view on that? And that includes what's happening at the Department of Defense and what's happening at the State Department. And we'll segue over to the State Department in just a second.
Yeah, Patrick, I think you're raising some really good points, and I think you're dead on. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. He doesn't have a lot of time. I think it is also important to understand, in my view, I mean, I go through this exercise, Patrick, where as I watch events in the United States, as a political officer in the State Department, sometimes I have the intellectual drill of how would I be reporting this back home if I were working at an embassy in Washington, D.C.? If I were a political officer in the Estonian embassy, for example, or somewhere else, how would I be assessing this? And I think, first of all, I think we have to sort of accept whether one likes him or not. Trump is not an aberration. Trump is not a fluke. Trump is actually emerging as one of the most significant, perhaps the most significant political figure, certainly since Reagan, maybe since Roosevelt. And he is, and as such, this is going to be a very, very different type of presidency that will challenge elites, that will take on status quo, and that will leave something very different in its wake than what went before it. He is moving very fast. He is very disruptive. Certainly, I think. Look, we've always trolling in its own forms, whether what internet or pre-internet. There's always been an era where trolling was a part of policy, right? Administrations have done this before. This is not something that's unheard of. Trolling takes on a far more prominent role in the Trump administration in its sort of policy and messaging than I think we've seen in previous administrations. I think people are uncomfortable with that. I think, frankly, my personal view is I think this can take on, this can be kind of counterproductive at times. But it is what it is. I think we also have to accept that Trump brings a different type of political messaging and political strategy than we've seen in previous administrations and previous presidents. And he has won 2 elections when I think he was outspent 2-1, 3-1, maybe more, 4-1. His opponents put many times more volunteers on the ground.
100%. I agree. I think, Rich, also that, with the Trump phenomenon, and I agree. I think he's iconoclastic. And I think whether you like it or not, he has become, one of the most dynamic and popular figures. And popular doesn't always have a positive connotation, right? You can be popular, but people still don't like you. And people don't understand that. It's the attention you get. But he's iconoclastic Americana. I mean, he is the guy, the New York tough guy who is smart and savvy, and you think he's playing checkers, but he's really playing chess, and he's looking to get a deal. And I still think that's going to serve him well. I just happened to check the polls again. Now, here's the thing. I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist, so I look at data all the time. And sometimes it just makes me crazy, data, because it can be interpreted so many different ways. It can be spun so many different ways. It can be manipulated. we have this thing for social scientists and scientists writ large that we call p hacking, right? So the p value tells you basically if something is statistically significant or not, and people mess around with the p value. And I do think that's a lot of these polls, whether they're not statistically manipulated, the questions or the sample populations are such that they're biased, right? And so your final results are going to come out biased. Remember, President Trump is not just, he's also unique in the sense that he has to battle the media the way no other president has to. They make their living off of him and attacking him. And you think they might have learned. And I think some people on the left are coming around. I mean, I notice it's only a handful of folks, including Rosie O'Donnell, who actually left the United States. I know Ireland's not so happy to have her there either. So I mean, you've got a few of these people screaming about, oh, I can't handle Trump. You've got Bill Maher on the other end, at least meeting with him and yes, attacking him and his personality the Saturday after or 2 Saturdays after he has a dinner with Kid Rock in the White House with the president. But you do have some people that are looking at it like you and I have been looking at it. What are the results? What is he trying to accomplish? Can I live with the delivery? And for me, I don't get emotionally attached to policy with a person, right? I can think that a policy is really important, but I don't let my support or my lack of support for a policy come from a person, or whether I don't like a person's personality. It's crazy to me as a psychologist that is a thing. That people are so enamored with the messenger one way or another that they're losing track of policy. I wanted to turn us to another question here, Rich, and that is the upcoming what we got to prepare for them, the midterm elections, which are coming up soon in 2026. A lot of media stirring that up, that he doesn't have a chance. Do you think the Democrats will impeach him on day one if they take the House back?
I think they'll try.
You think there's some Democrats that would say no? Because usually the Democrats fall in line on that stuff.
Yeah, I can see them trying. I mean, they'll throw. I see them undertaking a variety of actions to try to try to break his progress and slow his momentum. Impeachment would certainly be one arrow in the quiver. I think ultimately, first of all, I think they have massive strategic debates going on themselves on what's the way forward.
Oh yeah, I've never seen him in this much disarray. I've never seen the Democrats
and their own popularity. I mean, yes, Trump's popularity is falling, but theirs is.
Oh, but it's starting to take a tick back up. Actually, it went from a -10 to -6 in 1 week. So look,
yeah,
that's progress.
So I think that Democrats are in significant disarray and trying to latch on to different strategies on how to respond to this kind of phenomena that is Trump. Look, normal political rules don't apply to Donald Trump.
No, absolutely not.
The normal candidate could never have made the comment he made about John McCain and walked away from it.
Exactly, and which I wish he had never made.
I was appalled. I mean, I was appalled by that comment.
I wasn't a friend of John McCain's policies and some of them, and how he also, was not the better man with the whole Obamacare vote with the thumbs down. Now, a lot of people who haven't worked on the Hill thought that John McCain invented the thumbs down. That's been around forever. So many of them.
At least since Nero.
I mean, yeah, exactly, right? I don't know how much about it in our American system, but the thumbs down is just generally what the senators do when they go there. It's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And the reason why is they don't want to yell across the clerks there. It's weird. There's mics and everything. And it's just, so they do that. I think there was a lot of unnecessary attention over that squabble. I had the opportunity to, meet with John McCain's wife, and she had come to Poland when I was working there, and just an absolute lovely person and lady. So I regretted that. But I also see the kind of fighting spirit of President Trump that we've never seen in a president. I don't know where this idea that a president has to just keep taking all the incoming.
Yeah.
I don't understand it, and it's sort of interesting that I've never taught my children to just take all the incoming and not have a strategy how to give yourself distance and fight back. And
Well,
I think that's where you draw the line, is where he's seen as the provocateur, if you will, and the antagonist versus the protagonist, and he's just antagonizing people to get them to say something crazy about him. I am worried though, Rich, about these midterms, because what I see happening, which I hope I'm wrong about, is that if we have these continuous back and forth shifts in powers between party to party over a 4-year span, it's just going to be a vindictive 4 years of retribution, going back and getting all the people that did nasty things to you and your party for the last 4 years. So one of the things I thought about is, if the Democrats come back and they win the presidency in 2028, what are the chances that every single agency that got shut down, or at least cut in terms of employees and in terms of budgets, significant cuts in employees, staffing, and budgets, and actually priorities or things they actually did, they all come back, and all those people that were let go or their jobs were what we call rift, and they're just gone, they all come back and get back pay. So you see where I'm going. I mean, where does it end? Where does it end if the next party that comes back is just spending all their time making up for the things they didn't like? And that is a fair argument that the Democrats say that the Republicans are doing now. They didn't like the border, so they're just getting all their retribution and then some. They're going around. They don't like the way they're rounding up illegals. We can talk about that in another show. But I'm worried about this yo-yo or seesaw. I don't know what analogy I could use, but it's wanting me to get the Dramamine out already, because I think that's why people feel all this anxiety. We went from President Biden's very inactive inaction, basically no one knew who was in charge, to this frenetic change that's happening over 100 days. That's too much for people. So where do we get the medication that calms our systems down from, if the parties are going to just keep on getting revenge every 4 years?
Patrick, I wish I had the answer for that. I really don't. I think it's a great question. I think it may be one of the most salient questions in American political history. Look, we're a 50-50 divided country. This is going beyond questions of policy preference to issues of tribal identity. I think there are, if you look at different polls and studies, not only do people disagree with each other, they actively dislike each other. Or at least they dislike the picture they have of the other person. I have found a lot of times when you actually talk to people, it's not necessarily one can find common ground more often than not. And sometimes, you know what, maybe our view of their policy wasn't exactly as we thought it was, and vice versa. But I think your concern is 100% valid. And I think, again, going back to the national security and foreign policy realm, how do we develop a strategy? How do we develop a national security strategy? How do we develop sort of a core foreign policy narrative when we're in the midst of such a vitriolic internal debate, and B, as you said, turning over power with and reversing policies in very short order.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, real quick, we've got just a couple minutes here. one of the things that I despise as someone who studies psychology is cognitive dissonance, right? When one party completely forgets, or we can even call it selective amnesia, where they just forget all of the terrible things they did when they were in power. And now they're projecting to the party that took over. You can't do that. You can't go after your political enemies, even though they did it for the last 4 years. Listen, I want to have you back, Rich, again, especially as we see how Secretary Hegseth continues to direct the Department of Defense, and how our military and our diplomats are working with this administration, and maybe some ideas that you and I have and others have. Producer Victor, thank you again for your service. Did you want to add anything and then wrap us up for tonight?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for an incredible and insightful conversation. With Donald Trump and his persona, right, made a lot of great points. I just wanted to add that one of his unique sides is that he managed to bring together very different groups: religious conservatives, working class voters, wealthy business leaders, anti-establishment voices, right? This list keeps going on. But of course, there is also this polarization that we've been talking about. And one thing that Trump administration understands is that we've been moving away from this very traditional centralized approach towards anything. We talked about battlefield and combat, right? And we've been seeing a shift from those traditional centralized forces and units to a more agile and tech-enabled units. That same concept is true in hybrid warfare and information operations, where influence and disruption are now driven by decentralized actors, such as Telegram channels, independent bloggers, influencers, and other digital means. So one thing we know is that we know very little about what future holds, right? We can only wait and see, but at the same time, keep actively preparing for whatever the future holds for our nation and the world. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, and I hope to continue it in the future.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you.
And I'll just say, Rich, thanks. And we're going to bring you back because we didn't get to talk about the State Department, our beloved State Department.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take care. And for all our listeners, please listen to Top of Mind on Spotify.